Imagine a March morning in ancient Rome. Inside the Senate building, Julius Caesar, the most powerful man in the world at that time, walked in with the attitude of a Hollywood superstar who had just won an Academy Award. But instead of being greeted with flowers and applause, he was gifted 23 stab wounds from the very men who called him a friend. And this public betrayal became the greatest plot twist in history. Before we dive into the blood, the betrayal and how a politician could die, but his brand would outlive even pizza if you love uncovering the hidden truths of history, the kind of stories that are funny, chilling, and make you say, "What on earth?" Then make sure to hit like and subscribe so you will not miss out. And drop a comment to let me know where you are listening from. It is amazing that we can sit here together, connected across space and time, laughing and sometimes shivering at the insane twists of the past. Because what you are about to hear is not just the story of a general being stabbed. This is the story of how absolute power could turn a republic into a farce, allies into traitors, and a man into a global brand. Julius Caesar, the name you thought belonged only in school textbooks, will stay with you long after this video ends. Imagine opening your phone and the #1 trending topic is #et2brute. Your timeline explodes, memes are flying everywhere, and everyone is talking about the greatest political drama of all time. Not Watergate, not an impeachment, but an old Roman man getting stabbed 23 times right in the middle of the Senate chamber. Yes, Julius Caesar, one of the names more familiar than Pizza Hut, was betrayed by his closest colleagues, and that season finale left the entire ancient world speechless. If Twitter had existed in 44 before Christ, this hashtag would have been hotter than the Super Bowl halftime show. What makes this such a masterpiece of drama is not just that Caesar was killed. History is full of kings, emperors, and warlords who were assassinated. But few deaths were staged like a political show, a reality television event in real life. Picture this: Caesar, the most powerful man in Rome, walked into the Senate. Everyone stood to greet him. Friends, allies, protégés, men who had eaten with him, fought wars with him, and boasted with him surrounded him. No microphones, but the tension was like the finale night of American Idol. And then suddenly, instead of clapping, instead of applause, came a wave of daggers. His closest friend Brutus, the man Caesar treated like a son, joined in the most literal backstab in history. This was not just betrayal. This was the ultimate unfriend, block, and cancel. Caesar collapsed, looked at Brutus, and spoke the words "et tu, Brute," which roughly means, "So even you have turned on me." And boom, history closed one of its most dramatic scenes, a scene so powerful that even Shakespeare later had to borrow it for his play. Be honest, if your best friend whispered, "Do not worry, brother, I have got your back," you would not expect that back to mean a dagger. But this is not only the story of one assassination. It feels like the final season of a long-running television series, where the main character started as a reckless playboy drowning in debt, rose to become a general, and then transformed into a self-declared dictator for life. A man celebrated like a rock star, yet hated like a Marvel villain. And his ending, not dying quietly in a palace, but a mass stabbing in the very heart of politics, with the Roman Senate itself as a live audience. Modern viewers love Game of Thrones because of that anyone can die vibe. But let us be clear, George R.R. Martin was a timid fan compared to reality. Caesar was the original Jon Snow in Season 5. Imagine if this had happened today. CNN, Fox News, and BuzzFeed would all break the news at the same time, while TikTok would overflow with slow-motion clips of Caesar being stabbed with captions like, "When your bro says he is loyal, but..." The addictive part of this story is the irony. Caesar did not die at the hands of an enemy. He was not killed by invading barbarians. He was not taken out by a mysterious assassin in the shadows. He was killed by his friend group, the same men he dined with toasted wine with, and once declared Rome forever. And for us watching now, the only reaction is, wow, toxic workplace culture, Roman edition. And here is another twist. People thought that killing Caesar would save democracy, but no, his death set off a chain of civil wars even more chaotic. It was like deleting an app, because it lagged only to find out the entire operating system had a virus. The result, a few years later, Rome did not get a comeback of democracy, but instead got an emperor with absolute power. And Caesar, though dead, became an immortal brand from Caesar salad to Netflix documentaries. This is why the story sells. It is tragic, it is ironic, and it feels like some cosmic screenwriter was smirking. Oh, you thought democracy was saved. Plot twist, surprise. That is why the assassination of Caesar is not just a dry historical fact. It is the hottest political drama of the past 2,000 years, and it is still viral today. So here is the question for you. How did a man once buried in debt like a gambler in Las Vegas climb to the peak of power, only to end up in a pool of blood by the hands of his friends? How did a wild playboy transform into a dictator for life? And was that death really the end, or only the beginning of an even wilder twist? Sit back, crack, open a drink, and get ready. Because this is not just history. This is a Roman blockbuster, and Julius Caesar is the main character stabbed 23 times, yet living longer in human memory than almost any politician alive today. Before becoming the most trending stabbed politician in history, Julius Caesar was just a Roman rich kid, the kind of born with privilege but loves to take risks type. He was born into a noble family with influence, but not the kind that simply sat around waiting for money to flow into their pockets. Back then, Rome was like a giant mashup of Wall Street and Las Vegas money power and love scandals running side by side like Formula One race cars. And Caesar, from the very beginning, chose the path of an ancient influencer. Caesar was not only handsome by Roman standards, that meant a straight nose, just the right amount of curls and eyes with a hint of future dictator. He also had a gift for speaking like a modern TikToker with 1 million views, always knowing how to drop the punchline at the right time. But here is the thing, he did not use this gift to save money. He used it to spend money. Caesar loved parties, loved wine, loved women, and loved networking so much that no one could tell if this was political strategy or just a wild lifestyle. The result, he was drowning in debt like an American student after taking out massive loans for the Ivy League, but never landing a proper job. Ancient Rome had a full-blown loan shark industry, and Caesar was a VIP customer. He borrowed heavily from wealthy financiers, offering in return the promise of future power and political favors. Sound like a startup founder pitching to angel investors? Exactly. Caesar was essentially the founder of a political startup with himself as the product. The shares of the company power in the Senate. The investors, the deep-pocketed elite eager for political influence. The miracle, or the horror, was that Caesar did not collapse under this debt. Instead, he turned debt into fuel. The more he owed, the higher he needed to climb in power in order to pay it back. This was not the kind of working part-time at Starbucks to cover expenses. This was, you must build an empire as the chief executive officer to save your wallet. Otherwise, he would have been reduced to a Roman meme. This guy flexed too hard, now he is broke. But Caesar's story was not only about being a playboy. He mastered the art of turning that party boy image into charismatic politician. He was so smooth in conversation that everyone who met him felt special. He dropped political compliments like, "A man as honest as you deserves to lead Rome," or "A woman as powerful as you surely is the goddess of the Senate." These lines made both men and women more likely to vote for him, or at least lend him more money. This was flirting as political strategy, the kind of feature even Tinder has not built in yet. And of course, Caesar played the classic Roman card, political marriage. He married Cornelia, daughter of Cinna, one of the political kingpins who controlled Rome. Suddenly, the broke playboy became the son-in-law of the mafia. But what set Caesar apart was that he actually loved Cornelia, at least in the Roman sense of love. Meaning he still cheated, but he stayed politically loyal. Then came the drama. When the dictator Sulla seized power, he ordered Caesar to divorce Cornelia. A loyalty test. Most men of that era would have nodded and complied, because defying Sulla was like unfollowing a mafia boss on Instagram, dangerous to your life. But Caesar said no. He refused outright. It was a bold, risky flex, like walking onto Shark Tank and rejecting Mark Cuban's offer. The result, Sulla was furious and wanted him executed. Caesar had to go on the run, hiding like a broke college student dodging the dorm landlord for unpaid rent. During this exile, Caesar learned the ultimate survival skill, the laws of political jungle. He had to flatter the right people, bribe at the right moments, and wait patiently for his chance. This was when Caesar transformed from a reckless rich kid into a cold strategist. He realized that to survive in Rome, you had to be a fox wearing the skin of a sheep. Never forget, this was a society where one wrong word could cost you a dagger to the ribs. There is one famous highlight from his youth. He was kidnapped by pirates. While most men would have trembled in fear, Caesar flexed. He told his captors, "You are asking too little for my ransom. I am worth double." And indeed, after he was freed, Caesar gathered an army, hunted down the very same pirates, and had them all executed. This was not just revenge. It was a preview trailer for his future style. Caesar never forgot anyone who dared underestimate him. And so a new Caesar was born, as charming as an influencer, as ruthless as a mafia boss, and as indebted as an American student. But it was this bizarre cocktail that made him unforgettable. He was not a child prodigy. He was not a clean, untouchable saint. He was a survivor, the kind of person who could thrive in the most toxic political environment in history. If you think Caesar was just a lucky politician, remember this: to survive Sulla, to turn debt into power, to go from party boy to a man with a Senate seat, that was not luck. That was the ability to treat life like a poker game, and Caesar always played with the face of a winner. And this was only season 1. He was not yet a general, not yet crowned with laurels, not yet stepping into the Senate for his 23 stabs. But the foundation was there: debt, charm, survival, revenge. A perfect starter pack for his next evolution, transforming from a reckless playboy into a warlord flexing power across Europe. If part 1 was the trending drama of 44 before Christ, and part 2 was the playboy drowning in debt like an American college student, then part 3 is when Julius Caesar transformed from influencer into full-blown warlord. This was when he stepped out of the tavern, left behind some noisy love affairs, and mounted his horse with a sword in hand. And instead of charming Romans with a smile, Caesar began flexing with thousands of enemy corpses. The story begins with Gaul, the land that is now France and part of Germany. To the Romans, Gaul was barbarian country with more forests than people, more beer than laws. Sending Caesar there at first sounded like a job transfer. The Senate wanted him far from Rome to cause less trouble. But Caesar did not see it as exile. He saw it as the main stage for his debut world tour. And oh boy, what a debut it was. For 8 years of non-stop campaigning, Caesar turned Gaul into his personal stage. He did not just win battles, he documented them. Yes, Caesar was essentially the world's first war vlogger. While his soldiers pitched tents, Caesar was writing commentaries on the Gallic War, a kind of military blog. Today, my legions fought the Gauls. Spoiler, we won. People back in Rome devoured it because Caesar's style was simple, gripping, and dripping with, "Look at me, I am awesome," peak public relations. But do not think Caesar was just a good writer. He fought with a deadly mix of speed, cunning, and sheer audacity. The Gauls had tough tribes, and their most famous leader was Vercingetorix, the long-haired warrior often called the biggest troublemaker in ancient France. Vercingetorix united the tribes against Rome, but facing Caesar was like a small startup running into Jeff Bezos. The most famous showdown was at Elysia. Vercingetorix hid inside a fortress, confident he was safe. Caesar said, "Hold my wine." He did not attack head-on. Instead, he built two massive rings of walls, one to trap Vercingetorix inside, and one to keep reinforcements outside. A double lockdown, a wall within a wall. The result, Vercingetorix starved and surrendered. The moment he rode out, threw his sword at Caesar's feet, and gave up, that scene became the cover art of history books ever since. The victories in Gaul were more than military. They made Caesar a national celebrity. Ordinary Romans, sick of senators bickering in endless debates, now got daily updates of Caesar wins again. He became like a K-pop idol of ancient Rome, handsome, victorious, and even publishing his own content. Who would not be obsessed? And this was when Caesar began building a fan base of true loyalty. His soldiers followed not just out of duty, but out of devotion. Caesar knew every soldier by name, ate with them, shared the spoils fairly. In return, they were ready to follow him anywhere. This was no longer an army. This was a fandom. You could call them the Caesarians, the original stands who would die for their idol. Meanwhile, back in Rome, senators were sweating. A man with fans' victories and the ability to write his own propaganda, that was not just a general. That was a full-package brand. And when a brand grows too powerful, the old system begins to panic. What is fascinating is that Caesar knew the power of image. He staged his victories so the Roman public would see him as a man of destiny. When crossing the Rhine River, he did not just build a bridge of wood. He built a massive spectacle of engineering, marched across, and then tore it down himself to show, "I cross when I want. I leave when I please." When he reached the British coast, he did not conquer, but he left behind a story. Yes, I have been to Britain, like a travel blogger checking in before Europe even had tourism. The debts of his youth had taught Caesar power equals money to pay debts. But the victories in Gaul taught him power equals an immortal brand. And that became his new addiction. Caesar was no longer just a playboy. He was a warlord influencer, someone who turned every step into a story that spread like wildfire. But with that power came darkness. The death toll among the Gauls is estimated in the millions. If this were today, he would be trending on Twitter with the hashtag #CaesarWarCrimes. But Rome did not care. They only saw a man turning their republic from a local heavyweight into a global superpower. And they loved it. So from a broke playboy, Caesar now flexed with victories, with books, with propaganda, with a loyal fan base. He had become a military rock star. But once you are too hot, the old system cannot handle it. The Senate began whispering, "Can this man even be controlled?" And so Caesar's road back to Rome was not paved with glory alone. It was a high-speed train to civil war. Only Caesar was not afraid. He had already tasted debt exile and pirate daggers. Now he had an army of fans, a brand too big to stop, and an ego without limits. If part 2 was season 1, then part 3 is season 2 with the plot twist that the main character not only survived, but upgraded to boss level. And Rome, the city that loved drama even more than Hollywood, was about to witness the most explosive comeback in history. Caesar returning, and this time no one could stand in his way. If the victories in Gaul turned Caesar into a military rock star, then returning to Rome transformed him into the chief executive officer who broke the political game. Imagine you just won the world championship, bringing home a suitcase of gold, while the judges sat there with pale faces. That was exactly the vibe when Caesar left Gaul. He did not return simply as a hero. He returned as a national brand. And that brand was about to smash the outdated political system of Rome, the so-called Senate meta. The Senate at that time was like an ancient gentleman's club. Senators wore white togas and argued 8 hours a day over who gets to hold the remote control of the empire. Think of it as the Harvard Club, filled with traditions, rigid rules, and a burning hatred for anyone who dared break the format. And Caesar. He did not just bend the rules, he shattered the entire meta. The drama began with his crossing of the Rubicon, the most viral political debut in history. Roman law was clear: no general could bring his army into Italy. To cross the Rubicon with troops meant declaring war on Rome itself. Caesar stood at the riverbank, looked toward Italy, and stepped forward. One step, and the ancient world shook. He declared, "Alea eacta est," the die is cast. In modern English, game on. Picture that scene like LeBron James abandoning his team and signing with their rivals live on camera. Or Elon Musk announcing bankruptcy only to reveal he is about to buy Twitter. That move was not just military strategy. It was the trailer for a new season, Caesar versus the Senate Deathmatch Edition. The Senate immediately panicked. They scrambled to back Pompey, Caesar's greatest rival, like Iron Man squaring off against Captain America, but without the cool costumes. Pompey and the senators fled to Greece, hoping to gather reinforcements. But Caesar was fast and relentless. He took Rome like a gamer, speed-running a campaign, no cheat codes needed. The people greeted him like an idol returning from tour. What made Caesar special was that he did not rely only on his legions. He mastered political public relations. Instead of massacring enemies, he often pardoned them. Sometimes he even let them keep their positions. This was not kindness. It was branding. He crafted the image of Caesar the merciful, the man powerful enough to kill, but choosing to forgive. It was like a chief executive officer saying, "I could fire everyone in this office, but I want to give you a chance." The public adored it. His enemies trembled. The decisive clash came at Pharsalus in 48 before Christ. Caesar, with fewer troops and fewer cavalry, faced Pompey, the man of the Senate. Yet through brilliant tactics, Caesar crushed him. Pompey fled to Egypt, hoping for refuge. But here came the plot twist. King Ptolemy XIII, a foolish boy king, had Pompey killed to please Caesar. When Caesar arrived and saw Pompey's severed head delivered in a gift box, he was outraged. It was as if he was saying, "Bro, I wanted to roast my rival myself. I did not need you to ruin my content." And it was in Egypt that Caesar met Cleopatra, the queen of charisma. Together they became the hottest power couple of the ancient world, something like Beyoncé and Jay-Z, but with far more family drama. Cleopatra knew Caesar was her golden ticket to the throne. Caesar knew Cleopatra was bonus content for the next season. They joined forces, a mix of politics and Netflix romance. After settling Egypt, Caesar returned to continue the cleanup. He defeated the remaining opposition from North Africa to Spain. Old enemies were either dead or kneeling. And Rome was no longer a republic. It was Caesar's playground. Now comes the juicy part. Caesar began to flex. The Senate, once the decision-making center of the Republic, became nothing more than a supporting cast. Caesar declared himself dictator, perpetuo dictator for life. Before him, dictator had been a temporary emergency office. Caesar turned it into a permanent job title. It was like applying for an internship, then printing yourself a badge that reads, Chief Executive Officer for life. Ordinary Romans were torn between excitement and unease. Excited because Caesar brought victories, staged grand games, distributed free bread, and built magnificent monuments. Uneasy because he was clearly building a one-man empire show. The elites hated him with passion. To them, Caesar was like a hacker who had broken into the server-installed cheats and was now laughing at the system. But Caesar did not care. He walked into the Senate with the aura of, "This is my stage now." He sat on a special chair, wore a purple robe reserved only for kings, and had statues of himself erected across the city. This was not subtle flex. This was full-on flex, yes, I am king. Try to stop me. The Senate meta built on compromise rule of law and endless debates was now obsolete. Caesar rewrote the rule book in his own favor. And that lit the fuse for the next act. The elites decided that if they could not beat the hacker, they had to unplug the server. In short, Part 4 was the moment Caesar became the game breaker. From idle general to dictator, he smashed the Senate meta and turned the Republic into his solo stage. But in history, no flex comes without a price. And here the price would be paid in blood, right in the middle of the Senate itself. If Part 4 was Caesar hacking the game and turning the Republic into his personal stage, then Part 5 is where he flexes too hard. This is the moment in the movie when the audience starts whispering, "Wait, is the main character getting a little toxic?" But Caesar did not care. He had defeated every rival, his fandom was massive, and the rush of power felt like a powerful drug. In politics, however, overflexing usually leads to one thing, a bloody plot twist. Caesar returned to Rome like a rock star finishing a world tour. Crowds filled the streets, cheering. Many thought, okay, he will serve a short term, then hand power back to the Senate. But no, Caesar looked straight at the elites in their white togas, smirked, and said figuratively, hand back what it is mine now. He ordered statues of himself erected everywhere, not just in public forums, but even inside the Temple of Venus. That was like building your statue inside St. Peter's Basilica and asking the Pope to bless it. And he wore the purple toga, the royal color. This was not a subtle hint like, maybe I want to be king. It was, I am king already. Deal with it. The peak came when the Senate granted him the title Dictator Perpetuo Dictator for life. At that moment, the collective Roman world gasped. Traditionally, dictator was a short-term emergency role limited to a few months. Think of it like turning on emergency mode on your phone. Caesar hacked the system, switched emergency mode to permanent, and then deleted the off button. He was not just bending the law, he erased it. Ordinary Romans were thrilled. Caesar gave out free bread, staged bloody gladiator games, and even canceled debts. To the poor, he was Santa Claus with a sword. But the elite were furious. To them, Caesar had gone from hero to that guy, cosplaying as a god. And Caesar loved the extra flex. He sat on a golden chair in the Senate and made senators stand when he entered. Sound familiar? The same diva energy as demanding bottled Fiji water in your backstage dressing room. Caesar did not need Fiji, but he craved visible power. If anyone protested, he laughed it off and flexed harder. One legendary moment came during the festival of Lupercalia in 44 before Christ. The crowd packed into the Roman Forum. Caesar sat on a platform glowing like the host of the Super Bowl halftime show. Suddenly, Mark Antony, his loyal lieutenant and ultimate fanboy, approached with a crown. He raised it high, offering it to Caesar in front of thousands. The crowd held its breath. Would he take it? Caesar refused. Antony offered again. Caesar refused a second time. The third time, the crowd erupted. Caesar had pulled off the perfect public relations stunt. See, I do not need the crown. I am already king in your hearts. Every influencer today dreams of that move, declining the crown while making sure everyone knows you already wear it. But those very flexes humiliated the Senate elite. To them, Caesar had not only broken the system, he had turned them into decorations, into background extras for his solo performance. And nothing is more dangerous than a group of elites who feel reduced to someone else's stage props. Caesar also shattered one sacred taboo he renamed a month after himself. Quintilis became July Julius. Yes, that is why your calendar has the month of July. It was a flex so modern and so viral that it outlived him. But to Roman elites, it was a flashing red warning sign. This man wants to immortalize himself. His working style was equally toxic. He signed laws without consulting the Senate. He called meetings only to announce decisions already made. When senators tried to argue, he ignored them. It was like a chief executive officer calling an all-hands meeting just to show off his personal memes. And do not forget, Caesar still commanded a loyal military fan base, something no politician could match. Soon whispers spread. He wants to be Rex, a king. And in Rome, the word Rex was as toxic as the name Hitler would be today. Romans hated kings more than anything, scarred by memories of monarchy centuries earlier. Caesar was playing with historical trauma, flexing so hard, he triggered the deepest fear of Roman identity. By now, the elite had no doubts. To them, Caesar was an existential threat to the Republic. He was not merely dictator for life. He was chief executive officer for life in a company that had never been meant to have a CEO. And when a hacker takes over the server, the only solution is to pull the plug. Thus, the seeds of assassination were planted. Men whom Caesar had once pardoned now met in secret, whispering, "Brothers, if we do not stop him, the Republic is finished." Among them was Marcus Junius Brutus, the political son Caesar had treated almost like family. If this were a Netflix series, the writers were already preparing the trailer. Coming soon, the betrayal of the century. The irony, Caesar, brilliant as he was, remained naively convinced that his mercy and charisma guaranteed loyalty. He did not believe friends would betray him. He thought his fan base and his flexes were enough protection. That was his fatal blind spot, believing himself untouchable, crowned by an invisible crown that only made him the ultimate target. So Caesar stood at the very peak of power, flexing harder than anyone before him. But the higher the peak, the harsher the wind. And in the Senate, knives were already being sharpened, waiting for the day they would flash in the light. March 15th, 44 before Christ. To Romans, it was just another morning. To history, it was destiny, the Ides of March. If Google Calendar had existed back then, everyone's reminders would have read, "Meeting with Senate, bring knife." Caesar woke up in his villa. Rumor says his wife Calpurnia had a nightmare of his murder and begged him not to go. But Caesar scoffed. "Basically, darling, I am dictator for life, not some husband afraid of ghosts." A bad decision on the level of ignoring your GPS and driving straight into a pothole. He headed toward the Senate, entering the Curia Pompeia, a temporary chamber while the Senate House was under renovation. No guards, no fanfare. Caesar wanted to prove he was too powerful to need protection. It was the most naive flex of his career. The senators stood up, surrounding him. From outside, it looked like fans clustering around a celebrity to ask for autographs. Except instead of Sharpies, they carried daggers hidden under their togas. Caesar sat down. One senator stepped forward, pretending to present a petition. Suddenly, steel flashed. The first stab struck his shoulder. Caesar leapt up in shock. Before he could react, stab 2, stab 3, stab 4. Knives rained down. Allies he had spared, colleagues who once called him savior of Rome, all turned executioners. 23 stab wounds, 60 senators involved. This was no assassination. This was a mass stabbing event. Chaos erupted, steel piercing flesh fabric, tearing sandals, stomping. Caesar tried to fight back, but was overwhelmed. Then he saw Brutus. Brutus, his political protege, his almost adopted son, the man he trusted most. In that instant, Caesar gasped the line that echoed through history, "Et tu, Brute, you too, Brutus." It was not just a phrase. It was the sigh of a man realizing, this is not politics. This is betrayal carved into my bones. Covering his head with his toga to preserve a shred of dignity, Caesar collapsed at the foot of Pompey's statue. Irony level maximum, dying beneath the monument of his old rival. History's screenwriter must have laughed. How's that for a plot twist? The Senate floor became a horror scene. Blood splattered the walls. The marble ran red. Senators, shaking with adrenaline, stared at Caesar's corpse hands, sticky with blood, convinced, we have saved the Republic. Sorry, but that was the dumbest belief in Roman history. News spread instantly. Outside, the Roman crowd heard Caesar was dead. Instead of cheering for the Republic's rebirth, they wailed, they screamed, they mourned. To them, Caesar was not a tyrant. He was the man who gave them bread, gladiator games, and hope. Instead of flowers for the Senate, what they got was rage. Caesar's funeral became a memorial concert. Mark Antony, his loyal lieutenant, delivered a legendary eulogy, pulling back Caesar's toga to show the knife wounds. The crowd went from sorrow to fury. They rioted. They hurled stones at senators' houses. They set Brutus's home on fire. The Republic was saved by plunging directly into civil war. And here lies the ultimate irony: those who killed Caesar to prevent a king accidentally paved the road for the very first emperor. Caesar's adopted son Octavian later became Augustus, the first Roman emperor. By killing Caesar, the Senate signed the death warrant of the Republic itself. This was history's jaw-drop moment. Caesar died, but his death triggered a domino chain that created the Roman Empire. You think killing one man solves the problem? No, it only upgrades the problem into empire-level chaos. That is why 23 stabs in the Senate remains one of the greatest plot twists ever told. Betrayal, blood, irony, consequences. No screenwriter could craft it better. Shakespeare borrowed it. Hollywood filmed it. The internet still memes it. So next time you hear the word backstab, remember the term is not just metaphorical. It is literally rooted in this day, when Julius Caesar was turned into a human beehive by 23 knives from his so-called friends. And the final question, did Caesar really lose his body? Died? Yes. But his name became immortal. Romans named a month after him July. His heir built an empire under his shadow. His name Caesar morphed into Kaiser in Germany, Tsar in Russia. The man stabbed to death became a brand more powerful than anyone else in history, lasting thousands of years. If you thought the season finale was bloody with 23 stab wounds, wait for the aftershock, the part where the audience realizes, hold up, the drama isn't over. This is just the beginning. Caesar collapsed, but his fall triggered a domino chain reaction that turned Rome into the biggest reality show in the ancient world. Every political faction scrambled for their main character moment. When the news of Caesar's death spread, the Senate expected fireworks and cheers. Spoiler, nope. Ordinary Romans didn't see Republic saved. They saw their national idol betrayed. To the masses, Caesar wasn't a power-hungry dictator. He was the guy handing out free bread, hosting gladiator games that made the Colosseum shake, forgiving debts, and making Rome feel like it was winning. In short, Caesar was a pop star of the people. And when a pop star dies unjustly, fandom explodes. His funeral, it became a tribute concert. Center stage, Mark Antony Caesar's loyal lieutenant, a hype man with the charisma of a seasoned MC. Antony stood before the crowd, lifted Caesar's blood-soaked toga, and revealed the knife holes, 23 wounds each, a symbol of betrayal. Then came the speech part, morning part roast of the Senate. If microphones had existed, Antony would have dropped one at the end. The crowd lost it. They wept, they screamed, they rioted. Grief turned into rage. Rocks flew at Brutus's house. Cassius's villa went up in flames. The so-called liberators who thought they'd be hailed as saviors suddenly realized they were on the wrong side of PR. This wasn't a victory lap. It was a cancellation gone wrong, the kind where the mob comes to burn your mansion down. Rome spiraled into its next season's Civil War spin-off edition. The assassins Brutus and Cassius tried to stage a comeback, but history relegated them to secondary villains. Meanwhile, Antony claimed the spotlight, branding himself as Caesar's heir in spirit. But there was a surprise new player, Octavian Caesar's 19-year-old adopted son. Picture it, a teenager with perfect hair stepping up and saying, "Caesar was my father. I inherit the brand." He didn't need an army right away. He had something better, the Caesar trademark. And here's the Senate's biggest miscalculation. They killed Caesar to kill the cult of personality. Instead, they turned him into a martyr, a political saint. His name was immortalized, his image untouchable, and Octavian became the fresh new face of that legacy. If Caesar was iPhone 1, Octavian was iPhone 2, sleeker, more stable, and with even better marketing. Meanwhile, Antony overplayed his hand. He flexed too hard, parading around with Cleopatra like a half-Roman, half-Egyptian influencer power couple. For Romans, this was a massive red flag. Wait is our guy sleeping with a foreign queen and dragging her into politics. Drama levels skyrocketed. Octavian, on the other hand, played the long game. He wasn't flashy, like Antony wasn't eloquent, like Cicero wasn't chaotic, like Caesar. But he had patience. And in Roman politics, patience was a nuclear weapon. The true consequence of Caesar's murder wasn't the loss of a man. It was the loss of the Republic itself. The people no longer believed in endless Senate debates. They wanted a strong man. The elite were fractured. The system collapsed. Rome slid straight into a new series, Empire Season 1, starring Augustus. Looking back, Caesar's death was the ultimate marketing stunt, unplanned, but legendary. 23 stab wounds turned him into an icon. His name lived on Kaiser in Germany, Tsar in Russia, July on our calendars. One backstab accidentally created a brand that lasted for millennia. The Senate thought they were the screenwriters. Turns out they were just cameos. They didn't save the Republic, they wrote its obituary. The Republic didn't die under Caesar's crown. It died under the daggers of those who killed him. And that was the ultimate twist. You thought Julius Caesar's story ended when he collapsed under Pompey's statue, bleeding from 23 stab wounds. Nope. If his life was a movie, that was just the end credit scene. The real post-credit twist: Caesar did not die. He transformed into a brand. And that brand outlived every politician who ever walked the earth. Think about it. His assassins wanted to save the Republic, but in reality they became his accidental marketing team, launching the most successful PR campaign in history. Caesar, the man of flesh and blood, was gone, but Caesar the symbol was born. You can kill a person, but you cannot kill a brand. Exhibit A, the name. Caesar did not get buried with him. It became a badge of legitimacy. Octavian was crowned Augustus, but the people still called him Caesar. Every emperor who followed wore the name like a verified blue checkmark. Want to prove you are legit? Slap Caesar after your name. The brand spread beyond Rome. In Germany, the emperor became Kaiser, a German spin on Caesar. In Russia, Tsar, same root. With a single name, Caesar rebranded the very idea of supreme power across continents. That is a flex across centuries. And the calendar quintilis was renamed July Julius. Every time you glance at your phone and see July, you are flexing his legacy. Few humans in history have their names stamped directly onto time. Caesar did it without needing a smartphone reminder. The brand seeped into art and literature. Shakespeare turned his death into a legendary tragedy. For 400 years, audiences have memorized Et tu, Brute Caesar became a meme long before the internet, from Elizabethan stages to TikTok edits. Pop culture kept him alive in stranger ways. Enter Caesar salad, supposedly healthy, secretly a calorie bomb. Fun fact, it has nothing to do with Julius, created instead by an Italian chef named Caesar Cardini. But who cares? Slap Caesar on it, and it sells worldwide. Or look at Little Caesars. A dictator who died in a pool of blood is now a cartoon mascot selling $5 pizza combos. That is the paradox of an immortal brand, from political titan to commercial meme. Even Caesarean section carries his name despite being based on a myth about his birth. History could not resist attaching his brand to everything from rulers to months, from salad bowls to medical procedures. Always relevant since 100 BC. The real irony, the men who killed him to protect the Republic ensured his immortality. The Republic died, the Empire rose, and Caesar's brand went global. Today you may not recall the names of most Roman emperors, but you know Caesar even if it is just through a salad. Zoom out and you see the lesson: political power is temporary, but branding is forever. Governments collapse, empires fall, but a name, a symbol, a strong narrative, it can outlive them all. Caesar does not need to rule to be alive. He lives in our language, our calendars, our meals, our memes. From the hashtag #EtToBrute to cheap pizza ads, Caesar is still trending. 2,000 years later, he is hotter than most politicians in Capitol Hill. And that is the final twist. Caesar, the man who was killed for flexing too hard, pulled off the greatest flex in history. He did not just become a historical figure, he became a global brand, a brand that transcends time borders and logic. The story has no ending. Caesar is still here, in your July, in your salad, in your Instagram feed. You can stab him 23 times, but he will come back as Caesar salad. And honestly, that comeback is one Hollywood itself would envy. When you stand at the foot of the Eiffel Tower, gazing up at its cloud-piercing summit, you might believe that this place has always been beloved. That the City of Light erected this structure as a symbol of beauty, of civilization, of a grand France. But if you were to travel back to Paris in the year 1887 and listen closely to the whispers of the artists, of the refined ladies and gentlemen walking beneath the awnings of Montmartre's cafes, you would uncover a different truth. The tower was not loved. It was scorned, derided as the iron monster, as a smokestack in the middle of a historic graveyard. It was seen as a scar on the canvas of Paris, a shadow no one wished to acknowledge. So why does it still stand? Why, after more than a century, has it not only survived, but become the global face of France? This story did not begin with steel, but with conviction. And the bearer of that conviction was not an artist. He was an engineer, a man considered too rough-edged for the city of art. His name was Gustave Eiffel. The Eiffel Tower was not born out of inspiration, but from a competition. The 1889 World's Fair was approaching, and the Parisian authorities sought a structure so mad that the world would bow in awe. Something never before seen. a creation that would prove Paris was not just poetry, it was the future. Eiffel arrived, not with a brush, but with blueprints. A tower of iron standing 300 meters tall, higher than anything humanity had ever built. That is about 984 feet. Madness, they said. Iron is for bridges, not for emblems. But Eiffel merely replied, "If iron can withstand a river, it can withstand being forgotten." And so the design was approved. Yet when the plans were made public, Paris erupted in outrage. The newspapers called it a stain on the sky, a grotesque machine defiling the city of love. More than 300 artists and writers, including Guy de Maupassant, signed a declaration demanding the project be cancelled. They asked, "We already have Notre Dame, the Arc de Triomphe, the Louvre Palace. Why build a soulless iron pole?" To them, Eiffel was a heretic. His tower a deformity amidst elegance and antiquity, a cut into memory. But Eiffel did not respond with words. He responded with rivets. The work began, 18,000 pieces of steel, 2.5 million rivets, not a single fatal accident. Over 3 years, a colossal skeleton slowly rose from the heart of Paris, quietly asking no one to love it. And then one day, it touched the clouds. At that moment, those who once scoffed began to fall silent. Some climbed to the first level and exclaimed, "Paris has never seen itself like this." And they began to look again, not just at the tower, but at their own assumptions. Eiffel did not build a tower. He forged a symbol from a material once deemed unworthy. He gave shape to a belief that the new need not be loved immediately, but can be understood eventually. And then, like all great creations of humankind, the tower began to live another life. From iron monster, it became the torch of modern Paris. Once cursed, it became the place where love is proposed, where poets write verses, where France lifts its head after war. Millions have stood beneath it, looking up, not because it is the most beautiful, but because it survived. And despite everything, it still stands. In every city, there is always a structure misunderstood at birth, but in time it becomes the very soul of that city. Paris has the Eiffel Tower, and sometimes history is not written by those who are applauded, but by those who endure scorn to create something that defies time. Gustave Eiffel was not a painter. He did not write poetry, did not frequent the artistic salons of Paris, and was never praised as a romantic soul. But he possessed something that many dreamers lacked the ability to make dreams stand through structure. He believed that engineering too could be poetic, that iron and steel, if assembled with care, could inspire just as deeply as a painting. Before there was a tower bearing his name, Eiffel was a builder of things that carried the flow bridges spanning the Seine River train stations, whose vaulted iron roofs sliced the sky structures that made people look upward and wonder, why have they not collapsed? 19th century Paris was a city stretched between two worlds, between classical nostalgia and a fever for innovation. Along the cobbled streets, people still spoke of Voltaire, of Louis XIV, of the glorious milestones of the past. Yet at the same time, trains screeched through iron stations, electric lights flickered along the boulevards, and newspapers buzzed with a new phrase, the Industrial Revolution. When Paris decided to host the 1889 World's Fair to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the French Revolution, they wanted something the world had never seen. Not a statue, not a castle, not a stone column, but a declaration of the future. A competition was launched for a central structure to stand in the heart of Paris. Hundreds of designs were submitted, most of them traditional architecture domes, marble ornate flourishes, and Eiffel's design, 3 levels. An exposed structure, no walls, no partitions, only a skeleton of metal. Its peak reached 300 meters high, that is roughly 984 feet taller than both Notre Dame and the Arc de Triomphe combined. It looked more like a rib cage than a monument. Not beautiful, but impossible to look away, one council member whispered. Eiffel understood that. He did not aim for beauty. He aimed to shock. To him, beauty no longer lived in carvings, in tiled roofs, or in angelic statues. The new beauty was in the defiance of gravity. It was building higher than faith. It was turning raw material into the form of the modern age. And above all, it was transforming Paris into the capital of the 20th century. Few know this Eiffel was not the first to conceive the tower. Two engineers in his company, Maurice Couchelin and Émile Nouguier, were the ones who sketched the earliest design. But they kept it locked away, because they feared people would laugh. It was only when Eiffel saw it that he said, "If this angers people, then perhaps it has value." And he turned the sketch into a national project. Eiffel was not alone, but he was the one who dared to sign his name. When the project was approved, he knew he was making a gamble not just with his reputation, but with his entire fortune. He invested his own money, secured the rights to ticket revenue, and promised the tower would be completed by May of 1889. Time frame 26 months. Steel components over 18,000. Every rivet had to withstand extreme wind forces. Every support beam had to bend along aerodynamic curves. Eiffel did not build the tower with his hands. He built it with mathematics. And soon people began to notice something strange. The steel beams, standing upright, did not fall. They joined together like a puzzle crafted by gods, a floor per day, another each week. At the base of the rising structure, crowds gathered. Some cursed, some stood still, but no one turned away. That iron, once considered mere tool, was becoming image. Eiffel did not speak to the press. He did not argue with writers. He simply kept building. Each night, the glow of oil lamps from the site lit the dark sky like a beacon to the new century. When the final level was completed, all of Paris looked up. It was no longer a drawing, no longer a metal frame. It was a statement from the future, a message to those who believed beauty could never change, that only gods and cathedrals were allowed to stand tall. Eiffel rewrote the definition of a symbol, with rivets, with cranes, and with silence. The heart of Paris is not easily moved, and it is even less willing to forgive what it does not understand. When the Eiffel Tower first rose from the ground, it was not seen as a brave endeavor. It was seen as an insult. The higher it climbed, the louder the uproar became. The press called it a spear thrust into the heart of the city, a crematorium of style, a gigantic skeleton that insults French aesthetics. But those words were not the harshest. On February 14, 1887, a letter appeared on the front page of Le Temps, signed by more than 300 of Paris's leading intellectuals. The writer, Guy de Maupassant, the composer, Charles Gounod, the architect, Garnier, the very man who had built the famed Opera House. They stood united, not against a man, but against a mass of iron. They wrote, "Can Paris, the city of elegance and art, endure being shamed by a blackened smokestack, like a monstrous scrap heap thrust into the sky, as if to defy beauty itself?" No one remembers exactly how many articles attacked Eiffel, but everyone remembers the words they used: monster, upright, garbage, metallic madness. The people of Paris were not merely angry. They felt betrayed. Because what defines Paris is not its height, but its harmony. Not its scale, but its spirit. And Eiffel, with his tower like a slap to the past, had disfigured the skyline. Residents living near the site filed complaints about the lights shining into their bedrooms. Landscape painters fled the city. Writers changed cafes because they could no longer bear that grotesque silhouette stabbing their eyes as they worked. It was said that if you visited Paris in 1888, you would witness something strange at every street corner. There were whispers against the thing rising into view. And Eiffel, he remained silent. No rebuttals, no clarifications, no press conferences. He simply kept building as if public outrage were part of the structure itself. And strangely, those who hated the tower could not look away. Each day they watched it rise, afraid yet entranced. Like watching a disaster draw near yet unable to turn their backs. Some said, "We are witnessing the end of classical Paris." Others whispered, or perhaps, the beginning. In the dim-lit bars of the Latin Quarter, arguments began to brew. One group called the tower a calamity. Another, mostly students, called it a courageous declaration. They started visiting the site, taking photographs, sketching it, standing for hours just to watch the iron beams come together. And so something peculiar happened. The hated object began to attract. Not because it was beautiful, but because it resembled nothing else. No one knows for sure whether Eiffel read the criticisms, but one story survives after the tower was completed. Guy de Maupassant, the man who had fiercely opposed it, was often seen dining at its ground-floor restaurant. When asked why, he replied, "It is the only place in Paris where I do not have to see it." But everyone knew he was still looking. Perhaps the more something is rejected, the longer it lingers in memory. And perhaps it was that very fury that gave the Eiffel Tower its soul, not a monument loved from the start, but a symbol born of resistance. It is the scar in a city famed for flawless beauty. But it is also a reminder the new, the bold, must always pass through fire. And Paris, though it first denied it, ended up nurturing it with its very disdain. On March 31st, 1889, the sky over Paris was clear as glass. The morning sunlight did not blaze, it softened the world like a curtain rising before a grand performance. And at the center of that stage, a colossal figure was ready to step forward. Gustave Eiffel, dressed in a dark suit and a silver-tinted bowler hat, ascended the 1,710 steps of the structure once called the Iron Monster. He refused the elevator, though it had already been installed. He wished to feel each breath for himself, each pulse of the iron frame he had raised with blood, with the scorn of the crowd, and with the loneliness of a man who could see farther than his time. When he reached the summit, the French flag was hoisted. The wind swept across his cheek. The entire city stretched out beneath him, not the Paris that had judged him, but the Paris, seen for the first time from the heavens. At the inauguration ceremony, Eiffel raised his hand in greeting. He said little, only smiled and looked silently toward the horizon. On the ground below, those who once called him a destroyer stood in silence. Some looked at the tower with new eyes. No longer a stain, but something unprecedented, a form not found in textbooks, yet one that made hearts race, because it could not be explained. Just over a month later, the World's Fair officially opened. All of humanity poured into Paris. They came from England, the United States, Germany, Japan, and they all wanted to do one thing first: ascend the Eiffel Tower. More than 2 million people stood in line. Many climbed to the second floor on foot. Some wept upon seeing the city unfurl like a living map beneath them. They said that from atop the tower, Paris was no longer narrow streets and quaint cafes. It was the heart of a new world. The Eiffel Tower became the centerpiece of the exposition. It surpassed not only height, it surpassed prejudice. The very newspapers that once attacked Eiffel now sang his praises. One article called the tower a symbol of daring. A journalist described the sensation of standing at its peak as seeing humanity through the eyes of myth. And Eiffel. He did not claim to be a genius. He simply said, "I assembled the steel parts as a problem in mathematics. But people say it, knows how to dream." And thus, from a hated block of iron, the Eiffel Tower became the unmistakable face of Paris. People took wedding photos at its base. Artists painted it hundreds of times from every angle. Poets wrote verses about its shadow falling upon the Seine River. Lovers kissed on the second level as if love itself grew stronger in the shadow of steel. Some symbols are born to be loved, but others must conquer hatred to ever touch the human heart. Eiffel's tower belonged to the second kind, and perhaps because of that it endured more powerfully. The 20th century arrived. Empires collapsed. 2 world wars broke out. Bombs tore across Europe. But the tower stood. Not a single shell brought it down. No ideology erased its presence. In the First World War, the Eiffel Tower became a radio transmission hub, helping French forces halt the German army at the Battle of the Marne. It was not only a symbol, it became a weapon. And the Parisians who once wanted it dismantled began to feel gratitude. The Eiffel Tower was no longer a stranger. It became the silent guardian. Not one that stands to boast, but one that gives us a place to look up from. And from that moment on, no one asked, "Why was it built?" People only asked, "How did we ever consider tearing it down?" Glory may cause people to look up, but time always leads them to forget. When the World's Fair came to a close, when the light from the tower was no longer the first destination for every traveler, Paris returned to its usual rhythm, elegant, classical, full of order. And the Eiffel Tower, a newborn symbol, began a life of being overlooked. According to the original contract, Eiffel was permitted to maintain the structure for 20 years. That meant by the year 1909 it was scheduled to be dismantled and sold for scrap. The steel would be melted down. The rivets, once the heartbeat of a dream, would be reduced to molten metal, and the structure that had once stunned the world would vanish as if it had never existed. This was no threat. It was a real plan. The Parisian authorities, who had never truly loved this iron child, saw its removal as inevitable. They needed the land to redesign the Champ de Mars. The newspapers that had once praised Eiffel now fell silent with cold indifference. Once again, the tower stood on the edge of a cliff. And strangely, this time, there were no protests, no tears, no objections. It was no longer hated, but it was not loved either. It became an ambiguous presence. No one dared destroy it, yet no one fought to keep it. Eiffel, now an old man, his hair silver like rusted steel, traveled from place to place, searching for reasons to save his creation. He knew if the tower was to survive, it needed to become useful. So he quietly began transforming it into a laboratory. He installed instruments to measure wind speed on the upper levels. He mounted antennas for radio signal transmission. He allowed scientists to study meteorology, gravity, electromagnetic waves, anything that might render the tower irreplaceable. And then, in 1914, something happened that saved it. Something even Eiffel had not foreseen: war. The First World War broke out. France faced Germany. In an era where information was a weapon, the Eiffel Tower, equipped with its radio antenna, became the #1 strategic communications hub. From its summit, signals were sent to the front lines. During the Battle of the Marne, thanks to a transmission sent from the tower, the French army discovered the German advance and mounted a timely counterattack. It was not a monument. It was not a fortress. It was a structure once called useless that saved Paris. And so in 1910, as the dismantling deadline approached, the government changed its mind. The tower would be preserved not out of pride, but out of necessity. It was granted a reprieve like a condemned prisoner who had suddenly gained strategic value. Eiffel would not live to see that reprieve become permanent. He died in 1923 quietly, just as he had once built his tower without fanfare, without pleading for affection. But after his death, the tower did not fade away. On the contrary, it slowly came back to life. It became the national radio station. Then the site of France's first television broadcast. Observation posts were built, science exhibitions were held. The second floor was transformed into a restaurant. The third was expanded for international visitors. A structure once nearly melted down had become the backbone of modern communication. Not everyone knows this. People often gaze at the tower with inspiration, but forget that it survived not because of art, but because of utility. Because sometimes beauty does not need to be loved. It only needs to be indispensable. Like a person, the Eiffel Tower was not born perfect. It was rejected, despised, forgotten, then needed. It did not live on glory. It lived through endurance. Throughout the 20th century, it was not merely a tower. It was a wartime observatory, a broadcast mast, a scientific experiment, a living map of Paris. And whenever the world considered replacing it, there was always a new reason to let it stay. As if the world, though it may forget how to love, never forgets how to need. Not every symbol is forged in glory. Some symbols, like the Eiffel Tower, are cast in steel, tempered by hatred, shaped by neglect, and ultimately sharpened by time. As the 20th century rushed past like a churning river, Paris transformed endlessly. Skyscrapers rose, cars roared, electric lights illuminated every corner. Yet amid this frenzy of life, one thing remained still. The Eiffel Tower, without speaking a word, stood firm. No one asked where it came from, who built it, or why it existed. Because now it was no longer a structure. It was a memory. It was the place where a father first brought his son to point toward the sky, where an American setting foot in Paris for the first time looked up and whispered, "Now this is France." Where lovers stood still as New Year's fireworks exploded behind them, and a single kiss became immortal in memory. No one sees the rivets. No one measures the height or calculates the weight. People feel only something they cannot name. A sensation, an echo, a soul made of metal. The Eiffel Tower began appearing everywhere, not literally, but in the world's collective imagination. In Hollywood films, the tower appears as an instant symbol of love, of Europe, of dreams. Just a second of screen time, no dialogue needed, and American audiences know, we are in Paris. It is no longer a landmark. It is a cinematic incantation. Scaled-down replicas were built in Tokyo, Las Vegas, Buenos Aires. But nowhere else makes people cry when they see it. Only Paris. Only the place where the tower truly stands and breathes with the time it has lived. Also in that century, tourism flourished, and the Eiffel Tower, once hated, became the most visited destination in the world. More than 7 million people visit each year. Over 250 million have walked its metal floors since its opening. Children, artists, politicians, backpackers, dreamers, they all share one gesture: they look up. But not everyone knows that in looking up, they are witnessing perseverance. Because this tower was not born to be loved. It had to fight. It had to be rejected. It had to endure wars, delays, and the threat of dismantlement before it earned the right to remain. And because of that, it is not only tall, it is deep. Deep in memory. Deep in human nature. Deep in the eternal question, what will remain when this era passes? In recent years, the Eiffel Tower has begun to age. Steel rusts, paint fades, stairs creak. People say it needs maintenance. It needs repainting. It needs upgrades. But here is the strange thing: the more time wears it down, the more it is loved. Because now no one sees it as a marvel anymore. They see it as an old friend, with scars, with years, yet still standing amid a world that never stops changing. In an age of technology, artificial intelligence, and social media, where something new appears every minute, the Eiffel Tower is the one old thing no one wants to lose. It reminds us not everything new is better, and not everything beloved was ever welcomed. Legacy does not lie in material. It lies in how people remember. And the Eiffel Tower, through every storm, has etched its name into humanity's shared memory. No dialogue needed, no introduction required. It simply stands still. There is a cruel paradox in history. The things that endure the longest are not always the ones that were loved from the beginning. The Eiffel Tower is a living, ironclad example, a steel-proof testament to that truth. From the moment it existed only on paper, it was seen as a disruptor of order. Before a single beam was raised, it bore the sentence of aesthetic offense. And once it stood tall against the sky, it was not celebrated, but placed under a countdown to dismantling. And yet it stood. It breathed. It held its head high above Paris, as if all the scornful voices of the past were nothing but passing wind. Because what creates immortality is not applause. It is the ability to survive doubt. And Eiffel, more than anyone, achieved exactly that. Not through mass approval, but through a solitary will bold enough to believe in something no one else dared to. In today's world, where social media measures every thought in likes, where people fear disapproval more than being wrong, where safety is chosen over disruption, the Eiffel Tower offers a lesson that feels almost counterintuitive. To last through time, sometimes you must be willing to be hated. You must dare to stand alone beneath the pointed fingers. You must dare to create something even you do not yet know how the world will understand. You must dare to let history, not the crowd, be the final judge. Eiffel had no idea his tower would become an icon. He did not build it to please artists or to be printed on postcards. He built it because he believed in the integrity of structure in vision in the future. And with that belief, he endured hatred, silence, and neglect, so that his creation could live a life far beyond his own. The tower is not merely a destination. It is an architectural lesson in courage. A reminder that in a world obsessed with fitting in, sometimes you must be the one who does not. In a Paris that is round, soft, and poetic, Eiffel is a diagonal line, a sharp incision, an exclamation mark forged in metal. And because of that, it became irreplaceable. No one loves something because it is perfect. We love it because it is true to itself, even if it must stand alone. Look at the Eiffel Tower today, shimmering with lights reflecting on the Seine, the backdrop for proposals, wedding photos, and cinematic posters, and it seems unthinkable that it was once rejected. But that is the truth, and also its strength. Because if a structure once so reviled can become something so beloved, then perhaps we too have reason to hope. That ideas called crazy today might become essential tomorrow. That people seen as out of place today might be models of the future. That each of us, if we are resolute enough, quiet enough, brave enough, can leave behind a mark no one can erase. Not through speeches, not through instant success, but through the ability to stand firm against the wind. That is Eiffel. That is the tower. That is Paris. That is the lesson. And that is what makes us look up. Not because it is tall, but because it never bows.